Dear President Sweeney of Trinity College, and dear Trinity College, there were a number of boys and girls who made confessions to me about their involvements with a Joshua Stryker who wasn't even in my grade. I never had anything to do with them. They tried to make an exception one time out off near the state judicial branch offices, where people made all these confessions, demonstrations about their roles with like bombs, selling drugs through UPS, roles with federal crimes, with the ownership of UPS, with intercampuses, criminality also involved with identity of the ground, locations, uses of the schools. These are former director of the FBI, Robert Luskin, in his defendant capacities, leading up to and in a 2006 district court case, with people that were also intercities since then, and with other overt criminal enterprises with the area and private ones, recorded with identity thefts and frauds instances, not per the language of the law, but per what is greater than and more finite than that, while as its value. When I say identity theft / frauds, in other words, too, because, for example, there is where and how correlation and hypercorrelation, which are simultaneous, and with an additional identity of diffusion, positive or negative, that is relevant to where and how we think, humanity. There are people with theories in place of this, that are families that have been using locations remotely to hide remote uses of themselves. See, even our directors of agencies, before there were sophistication, before our founding parents were born, all identity of the ground, identities of sophistication were measured and maintained. The styles of logic of positive and negative treatments that couldn't defend themselves, and from what exploits that. So everyone as self-valued roles would exploited that. Effectively, per a multi-front maintained by nature, needed by everyone, to blame the real cause of negative value, nature progressions, acts, nature as a means to discern out other things, others, and their own selves, like money, simultaneously and / hyper simultaneously, leaving out exceptions and exception nature. American history is obligated to teach about how they made exceptions in exception nature for industries, because everyone was a fact-cheaping nature slave. And if they tried to speak up about it, that would be measured. And that was measured and maintained. All unity and simultaneously all non-unity is multi-front employed by nature, where and how we are quality as fact-cheaping nature. People pretend make positive and negative theater treatments that are criminally, and not just criminally foreign influenced, criminally legalized, criminally foreign influenced, value treatments, law treatments, identity treatments, time treatments. These people have collusion with the people that, in other words, they show us in the national / international news, and the ones that fight with each other. They're calling each other names, and they're calling us names simultaneously, because in the background they're using their pretended opinions honest, and their pretended convictions honest, to hide, collusion, while they're sequence shift collusion. They're preventing people from having mandated law followed, where the identity thefts / fraud were relevant to the victim, but victim predator reactions and hyper predator reactions and defenses of themselves as the branch of the government, as the roles with a whole bunch of other countries here, and with their kids shared here, and our kids shared there, and where and how that is exploited and relevant to the quote, sense and sensibilities, unquote, of using Jane Austen's phrase. and using, knowing distinctly, non-distinctly, and simultaneously how the human identity of volume slash S only makes more of one individual and one species identity of volume. And one group, positive or negative to itself. Any other group, any group. See, but the individual voice and the species voice and the alpha and omega and how it goes with the yin-yang more probably than the sciences, and more hyper probably. And evidence is recorded, and who would deny this? That also recorded needing to self-value people involved with theories that are offensively affront to the relevant, complete possession of the sophistication of the syntax nature of our legal representatives, and with the private lawyers. So what kind of things they would say to justify roles? Which they bring up slavery, and they leave out, and they already recorded themselves and hyper recorded themselves, pretending not to realize it, and simultaneously using and having used theories to measure and maintain self-value, obfuscated and having been obfuscated, and way worse. Simple things, simple revelations about American history, about how everyone was not allowed free speech, so they could maintain measured. If anyone tried to speak up about that outside of measured, forced database relationships and conversations with them where other countries were using remotely the colonies. And those locations were themselves being used remotely. But by what? There are proofs that not one modern nation understood, because it knew that countries A through Z effectively were maintained, only capable of defending positive and negative treatments that could no longer defend themselves, and sciences treatments, names treatments that could no longer defend themselves and afford correlation slash hypercorrelation, simultaneously inherent, active, and progressive means at each age of fact sheet nature. I could have told American history real fast by now, but you guys aren't. It's a predicate acts delivery system method. We just, if you want to debate that, call it a breaching method, a human fact sheet nature breaching method. And other was pretended legitimate, and the excuses of it, the exceptions in the exception nature, that itself was employed. So we have to use, for example, natures of definitions takes, too, where natures of the law takes, where the law is value as nature, slash nature as value. I'm not a lawyer, I'm not a police form, I'm not a criminal. Correlation, honest, and hypercorrelation reveals that, and how lawyers and judges and police forms and politicians and everyone's opinions A through Z, overt criminal enterprises and private ones, were in collusion with opinions slash convictions, forcing people to group think and to hypergroup think, and or while increasingly stealing our identity, pretending they don't understand what we say. Connecticut and branch switches names, forged names. They already fabricated audio and video in all kind of cases. All private tied to them are involved with it. So increasingly they had and have roles with self-valued uses of all locations. See, this one breaching method used all locations and divided tribes A through Z, and united tribes A through Z. And it divided colonists A through Z, and united colonists A through Z. And it divided them and the natives together and united them simultaneously multi-front, because nature maintained, needs to maintain naive sequence treatments, value treatments, instances treatments, before each instance at each age of fact treatment nature. This is a method that makes illusions relevant to where they're pretending that they're, So where every all victim identity ground, jobs, titles, locations, voices are recorded, only allowed manifest information. They pretend other by, allow it. In other words, they're offensively the national/international news as victims